friend of mine by the name of Shaka Sisulu around 2008 asked me a question that would take me 6 months to answer. He said, what would you do for absolutely no money? And I think it might have been a throwaway question for him, but for me, it really talked to, so what am I here to do? What's my purpose and what's my passion? Like, what is the thing that I will do when it's not sexy to do it, right? And I spent the next 6 months literally thinking about that question. And I came to two answers. Answer number one was I was passionate about developing people. And the second answer was I was passionate about music.
Refiloe Ramogase is a legendary figure in South African entertainment with over 20 years of experience managing iconic artists like TKZee and Khuli Chana, to name a few. To leading urban divisions at both Sony Music and Universal Music Group, he has co-founded Maftown Heights, one of Africa's largest hip-hop festivals, and served as the chairperson at the South African Music Awards. Join us as we go inside the world of a multi-sectoral leader that has made a pivotal impact on spotlighting South African talent. Thank you so much for making the time, bro. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I think you are a legend in this game. And I really look forward to just diving into the different things that you involved in, you know? But as someone who always struggles to answer this question, it's like, especially when we do so many different things, I'd love to know if you like out at a dinner party and someone asks you like what you do for a living, like what is your answer?
Man, I struggled with that question for the longest time as well. So I decided to wrap it all up into what I call a specialist music supervisory agency.
Amazing.
Right? So it kind of encapsulates, I think, a lot of the stuff that I've done over the years.
Yes.
So I do some sync work for long form and short form content. I do some bespoke music creation under that agency. I do a lot of kind of sponsorship or rather music strategy consultation specifically for brands in terms of where they want to or how they want to play and what POV they want to have in music. I do long form content of late as well. That's sitting in there. We've got a documentary that we'll chat a bit about when we start to speak now.
Amazing.
I've got festivals and just create bespoke experiences around music.
Amazing. Yeah. Amazing. Great answer. I love it. And bro, what is if we're watching the origin story of Refiloe, like where does the story begin? And I'd love for you to give us as early context as possible.
Sure.
Like, you know, touching on family and, you know, if we're watching the movie of your life, you know, where would that story begin?
Would open in Orlando West, Umlo, Soweto. It would open to a young man who has two brothers.
Yes.
One older, one younger. Our names actually make a sentence, funny enough.
Oh, wow,
so,
really?
Tabang, Refiloe Sechaba. How intentional is that? Tabang means be happy. Refiloe means we've been given. And my younger brother's name is a nation.
Wow.
So 3 brothers. Be happy we've been given a nation.
Beautiful.
Born to 2 parents, obviously. But, you know, a father by the name of Isaac Ramogase and a mother by the name of Belina Ramogase, who are both late now.
Yes.
And you know.
What did they do?
They in and of themselves, I guess, were frame breakers. I mean, it's often weird to, like a Gen Z or a millennial or a Gen Alpha is going to watch this and they're going to be like, big deal. But, you know, you're talking about the heart of apartheid South Africa.
100%.
So, like, you know, they pushed themselves. My dad was a doctor. He was the first person of 11 kids that went to university, let alone graduated.
Incredible.
And then my mom was one of 13. And again, one who pushed herself. She started as a nurse and then eventually went into occupational health and a number of other things.
Incredible.
Over her life, you know. So what I appreciate about that story and why I opened the story there is that go to around 78, call it when I'm 1 year old. They make the bold, brave decision around 78, 79 that they want to take their kids to a white school. Unheard of at the time.
Yes.
And the story And the journey then starts where my older brother then goes to Sacred Heart College, which was a Marist Brothers college.
Yeah.
I think you guys have a St. Joseph's down here in Cape Town, right? St. Joseph's.
I'm from Johannesburg. But
okay, cool. So you know Sacred Heart and
like
St. David's.
Yes.
Exactly, right? So the Marist Brothers schools.
Yeah.
And at the time, there was an incredible man by the name of Brother Neil McGurk, who was the principal at the time.
Yes.
Who made a very brave decision at the time. I think what I recall is, as I'm preparing to also go to school, is a lot of threats that we're getting, like on telephone calls, death threats that my brother's gone to, like, threatening that we're going to get harmed.
Yes.
There's a lot of back and forth conversation with this brother Neil McGurk, who's telling us, look, if it all goes belly up, he'll personally drive my older brother to Waterford in Swaziland. So this experience starts there, where, you're placed in this context where we are just literally out of the comfort zone from the word go. So go to Sacred Heart College, and I just remember, like, in those early years, there used to be these things called stairways back then. So I don't know if you remember those stairways where it would be like, on a specific day, for whatever reason, they'd say people mustn't go to work or mustn't go to school, and we'd have to be in like boots of cars to go to school.
Crazy, man.
And then eventually we'd end up like with a teacher who I think is late now, Mrs. Stevenson, would offer her home so that we wouldn't have to run the risk of running that gauntlet when we go to school. But yeah, you spend this time at the beginning of your life where you're quite distinctly other. So when you're in the township, you're other because they're like these kids that can speak English, and you're these kids that go to these schools.
Yes.
And when you go to those schools, you're other because there's only so few of you there, right? And it's an interesting experience because I think that teaches you very quickly is, I think, at a level empathy, right? Like that experience of not being part of the center groups can be something where you can be quite empathetic. So that's how it starts.
That's crazy. And that's it's crazy to think that, that's, it didn't become that. That's what you're used to. That's your reality,
Correct.
That's insane, and definitely I'm sure has and plays a role in the way you approach so many things in your life. When does the first sort of moment happen that is somewhat related to this industry? I mean, you studied after school.
Yeah, I was very much, there's no one, look, I've got uncles who are musical. I have an uncle by the name of Silas Ramogase, who I never met, who went into exile, played apparently with Brahu and all those guys, but passes away in exile way. I've got pictures of him. He was a musician.
Yes.
I've got another uncle by the name of David Ramogase who plays the penny whistle.
Yes.
So there's people who are musical, but they are not in my immediate family. My immediate family, very academic. I've got an older brother who literally shot the lights out at school.
Really?
Yeah, 100%. And, the trajectory was always one of go to university, finish a degree, get yourself a comfy corporate job somewhere, and build a house and, 2 kids, a dog, picket fence. And I just remember, like, through high school in particular, I started to really kind of, I think there's a friend of mine by the name of Cleo Zwani, actually slightly earlier than high school. Him and I, we met in standard 2, grade 4. Jeez, I'm still a standard guy. Grade 4. And we sat together in class from that point onwards. And his dad was studying in the US. I think it might have been Harvard or something. So he was going in and out of the US. And he came across this thing which was hip hop. And he started to bring back tapes. Like, he'd record tapes, cassettes from radio. Wow. And we would bring VHSs or Betamaxes.
Yes.
Betamax videotapes of Yo MTV Raps, right? Wow. I think that's what it was. This is 85, 86, 87. So now we started getting exposed to Kumo D and Run DMC,
Wow.
and all of these guys. And like, we were these kids that then started to want to do this rap thing, you know? So we started forming little rap groups at school. We came across a couple like-minded individuals who we went to school with, guys like Tembani Mabandla, who came on a little later, Thokozani Shongwe, and a couple others, guys that we would just rap together. Terrence Neal, a couple guys who, Sacred Heart, we were the Tree Gang, and we'd spend a lot of time just doing this rap thing, right? And then we started getting to odd things like skateboarding and very
crazy,
odd
man.
80s
Soweto,
Soweto circus.
That's
Soweto,
crazy
right?
to me, man.
Yeah, so, you know, that's where the passion for music, I think, starts.
Yes.
And through school, you know, we organize little talent concerts. We do this. We try and kind of infuse culture into the school. And that's kind of the first inklings of that. This is something I'm passionate about.
Amazing.
Yeah, but fast forward to high school. Fast forward to varsity. I go and, I first study law, but I end up doing a BA in politics and English, which I complete.
Yeah.
And then I end up working in operations of all things, right? Like I built call centers.
Wow.
Yeah.
Something you just stumbled upon, or just like naturally went there, or were you like consciously trying to?
Actually, it's a function of me going to varsity, playing around it when I was at UCT. My mom was quite strict. And I think in the second year, I kind of stuffed up, and she was like, well, you're going to have to pay for your own varsity. So I ended up actually putting myself through university.
Wow.
Where I would go to call center job at night, and then I'd go to varsity during the day. And it was there where I started to kind of develop a passion for kind of how does a call come into this place?
Yeah.
How does this all happen? So I then got involved in like the operations and as well as like the tech side of it.
Yes.
And then I worked for a consultancy that was actually building the call center. I think I was working for one of the big mobile operators at the time. Whilst I was at varsity, and there was a consultancy that used to do that stuff there, and they were like, you seem to have an aptitude for this. When you finish varsity, why don't you come and join us?
Okay.
And that's how I ended up in that space. Moved down to Cape Town. I worked for EduCore, and I built some of their call centers and was involved in their call center operations for a bit.
And where are you consciously at this point? Are you like, I love this is what I'm going to do forever? Or are you thinking in your mind, there's some other things I got to tap into, you know?
Yeah, I'm a young 20-something-year-old rock star at that time.
Yes.
So I'm working by day, but like living by night.
Got you. Double life.
Yeah, 100%. You know, I'm out a lot. Cape Town was quite formative in so far as that the nightlife, especially circa 2000, early 2000s, 2002, 3, 4, was interesting. Like, that's the times of the fairs and all of these really cool spots that were out here. And like, I started getting introduced to a number of different type of scenes, right?
Absolutely.
Outside of like my first passion, which was hip hop. And I really started to kind of have a real appreciation. And because Cape Town was always so much more international in terms of its appeal and flavor, you know, one started to really appreciate a lot around kind of what made people want to move. And then whenever I'd go home, I'd also then intersect with a very interesting, very local scene from people who I grew up with, because people like Kabelo Mabalane from TKZee and Tukulu Chabalala in particular are people who I've known since we were younger. And it was interesting to kind of watch them develop from essentially these high school, private school kids like I was, but who jumped first, right? And when they jumped first, I remember when they did that first EP of theirs, Take It Easy, which was very much a hip hop project. And then that transition from like that into Palafala, call it a year later. And just the conversations I was having with Kabelo during that time.
Kabelo told me a crazy story. He said this one time he was so out of it. And said he was driving in the rain and he phoned you and he asked you to come drive him home.
Oh, yeah.
And he says you were like, how are you just like hanging around with them? Or are you just like...
Yeah, at that time we're friends. And Kabelo and I, as I say, I'm in corporate at that point in time. But we're spending a lot of our time together. And it becomes important with a question I'll ask myself later, which I'll get to.
Yes.
But yeah, Kabelo and I, wild stories. look, let's just say I'm privileged to know Kabelo and have watched the transformation. Actually, he'll probably say the same of me because I think if we hang out together, you need to assume that we were doing a lot of the same things at the same time.
Of course.
But yeah, I remember that story. Actually, it's not that he was out of it. He was somewhere. Then I don't know what fight he got into, and I had to pick him up. This is before GPS, whatever, in the middle of some suburb where he's trying to explain to me where he is by, there's a tree here and there's a this there at like 6 a.m. to pick him up. And then he's late for a show which he has to fly out for. So we had to gun it to get to the airport for him to get there. And he had this manager back then called Mike, who used to always, everything was Mickey Mouse. Like, come in, you're late. Mickey Mouse. So those were wild times, but really formative times in terms of music selection and taste. And that spectrum, right? Because I recognize that, yes, as much as there's this interesting local scene brewing, there's just so much more that we can still do with our scene.
Yes.
You know? So, yeah, that's the early 2000s. And then call it by around 2007.
Yeah.
I'm beginning to quickly realize that I'm not a corporate animal.
Okay.
And I've kind of had this weird relationship with the universe insofar as when I start to feel like I don't belong somewhere, the universe will quickly conspire to make sure I'm not there.
I love that.
You know, so at that time, the company I was working for gets sold. And let's just say that the new owners were wanting to head in a different direction, and I didn't want to head in that direction either. So I found myself needing to kind of ask myself what I wanted to do with my life. And a friend of mine, by the name of Chairperson, around 2008, asked me a question that would take me 6 months to answer. He said, what would you do for absolutely no money? And I think it might have been a throwaway question for him, but for me, it really talked to, so what am I here to do? What's my purpose and what's my passion? Like, what is the thing that I will do when it's not sexy to do it, right? And I spent the next 6 months literally thinking about that question. And I came to two answers. Answer number one was I was passionate about developing people. And the second answer was I was passionate about music. And because I'm ops guy, I have to be evidence-based and I need to be able to find the evidence in my life.
And results.
Exactly. So like I looked back and I said, so if I'm really passionate about people, show me evidence. And I looked at like how I always had this knack for whatever management role I had. I always looked for the diamond in the rough and I always made it a point of mine to polish that diamond and change people's trajectories. And the second part of that question is naturally, well, kind of answers itself. Everything I did outside of corporate was around musicianship.
Yeah.
Around 21, I also had tried my hand at managing some mates who wanted to be in music. I think I was always clear that I always wanted to be in the background. And then I remember that was like about month 4 where I got those two answers and I was like, so what with this? And then 6 months, around the 6 month mark, it was like, if I merge these two things into one thing for me, what does that look like? And it was like, oh, okay. What if I was to get into the space where I put my money where my mouth is? Because I would always look and say, this person could have done this and that and this with their career. What if I was to be that person who's shaping people's careers in that way? And that's actually how Dream Team Talent Management, at least the seeds of it, were born. Because once that aha moment came about, the universe conspired to bring in some incredible individuals who had known my whole life, but who came in at the right moment where we could build together.
Wow. And that's such an important thing, right? That timing is,
exactly.
You know, you can know one another, but that moment of everything conspiring to go like, now's the time is like a really special thing. Exactly.
And I remember, and I think I might have met you through him, George, Wandin Zimande. Loction Culture?
Yes.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's either J. Yeah. It's either JR or Wandi.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, Wandi and I meet around that time. He's been running with Loction Culture, and I think at that point in time, he's also kind of looking to pivot into his DJ era and into his kind of music era, where he's leaning into his passion around music. And I remember it was when now there is a China Mall on corner Republic and Jan Smuts, I think it is. And it used to be a mall.
Yes.
And there used to be a restaurant at the very, very top of it, which overlooked like Santon.
Yes.
And we started to sketch out what would then become the CI for Analog Nines.
Crazy.
And it was from a conversation that we started there.
Crazy.
What would it look like? And we started to go, okay, well, we would want to talk to people like ourselves.
Yeah.
And we sketched out a cassette, I remember, and we sketched out all of these elements that kind of represented, music the way we consumed it when we were younger. And then we were like, what would we call it? Well, that's analog music. And then analog was born.
Wow.
Yeah. So
crazy story, man.
100%. And that's how it started. And I recognized at that point in time that was a bit of a play for me because yes, this was going to be one of the ways I was going to be involved in music. It was also a really nice fast track way for me to build a really strong network with musicians in the country.
Yes.
And what I recognized at that time around 2008 and 2009, where this is beginning to happen, is that, remember, that was the age of the DJ.
Yes.
The DJ was like literally when you went out, you went to a DJ-driven event.
Yeah.
There was no space for musicianship at that point in time. And what we wanted to then create was, if we're going to be analog, let's find a platform where musicians can come to a bespoke, small connoisseur audience that is really going to appreciate this music. And so it was born. I remember at the time, he was quite cool with the guys. He had started talking a bit to the guys who had started a restaurant franchise called Moyo.
Yes.
And there was a guy called Jason in particular. So we started to tell him what we wanted to do. And I remember he said to us, he gave me 2 gems in life. The first one was, he was like, guys, we're going to build this party where if no one else comes and it's just us and our family and friends, we're going to have the time of our lives. So that insight for me was, just be authentic and true to who you are in what you're going to craft and build communities around who you are. Because if you show up authentically, people are likely to enforce or endorse that, should I say, as opposed to you trying to be something that you're not. And then the second thing he taught me over the time we worked with him, which I still live by, is a measure of a man or a person is not what they say yes to, but what they walk away from. And I think that's served me well over the years.
Great advice, man. Great gems there.
Yeah.
I love that.
So that's how Analog started. And that's Wandi Nzimande and how he comes into my life.
Yeah.
And we then build a really interesting movement, which I think needs a documentary.
Yeah.
And now that I'm in the long form space, I think I want to honor that journey
Yeah.
with some kind of a content piece.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the second person the universe brings to me around that time is Khaukhelo Mapai, who I then go on to co-found Dream Team South Africa with. And
how does that happen?
We knew each other from childhood days. As in not just Khaukhelo and I, it's Khaukhelo, his younger brother and I were best friends when we were in junior school.
Okay.
And his dad was my soccer coach.
Crazy. Okay. It's family ties.
Yeah, it's family ties, 100%.
Yeah.
And, he was also very close with my older brother. He continues to be quite close with my older brother as well.
Yeah.
And he kind of hears me out and kind of hears where I have this passion. And what I loved about him is that he capacitated me. He was like, okay, cool, let's do this thing.
Okay.
He came from, I think, a bit more of a senior corporate background in terms of the front end of a business. And he kind of knew how to, his background is sales and marketing. And he was like, okay, I like the vision. I think we can do this thing together. And I'll help you think through how you structure a business and how you kind of scale a business.
Yes.
And I think that's the big learning that I took from the time that I spent with Khaukhelo in particular.
Incredible. So it was a conscious, let's do this. Here's the idea. This is how we formalize it.
Correct.
And let's do this together. And
100%.
Let's put the sort of wheels in motion.
100%.
Amazing.
100%.
Amazing.
And the next couple of years.
And what's the first sort of
big
move or signing or?
Jeez. I go in. Kabelo and them were on their way. They wanted to do another album.
Yes.
And I spoke to them and we pitched to them and we're like, we can manage you guys. And I've actually been managing Kabelo since and TKZee since.
Crazy.
So that was the first big move. And when we got TKZee into the fold, we were quite intentional that we wanted an established group.
Yes.
Which would then serve as a lighthouse.
Yes.
For us to be able to attract or first of all, to bankroll new talent, because as you know, new talent development is quite cash intensive.
Yeah.
So we knew that we wanted to do that, and from our proceeds, we would then build out an engine that could then prove its worth in terms of new talent. So with TKZee, she's in that first 2 years, did a lot of stuff like.
What was TKZee charging that time?
More than most. They still
Really?
continue to charge more than most.
Amazing.
Let's just say, like they've managed, because we manage the brand so well, the brand maintains its equity. So a conversation around a TKZee is not a conversation that is going to be a bargain basement conversation.
Amazing. Just what a important time in. Like there's these big moments throughout culture and time, but there's these certain moments that are just, are going to last forever. And that 100%. Is one of them,
Exactly. Timeless music. Incredible musicianship. Yeah. And I just think just incredible human beings.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. And then who comes thereafter? And I just want to touch on that. I really love, that was part of your strategy, because a lot of people don't realize when they're starting labels, they're taking money from, I always say, like, energetically, where's the money coming from?
Yeah.
When energetically you're bringing money from an artist that is succeeding and putting it into a different artist, like
Correct.
That just somehow does something that you can't explain. But, some people are taking money from, someone's dad's car company and putting it into musicians. Energetically, something just doesn't work the same way. So it's incredible that you guys do that. So who comes after TKZee?
So this is where the intersection between these two human beings is amazing, right?
Yes.
So I can't remember whose memorial it was for the life of me, but I remember back in the late 2010s, early 20 teens.
Yes.
Baseline seemed to be the place where if somebody passed, there'd be a memorial there. And I remember I was at a memorial and I'd been to many memorials there, right?
Crazy.
And I'm standing there with Wandi, the late Wandi, after the memorial, just outside Baseline. And this young kid, young man, shall I say, is walking, call it 200 meters away from us. And Wandi is like, yo, that's my favorite rapper right now. Like this kid here, you've got to, he's just gone solo. He was part of Morafe. And lo and behold, there was Khuli Chana 200 meters away, right? He had just dropped Motswako Originator at the time.
Yeah.
And I think he was struggling. And remember, they had gone the indie route. And there was only, I think, he comes to us and Wandi's like, so how's it going? And he was like a bit like down about it. And he was like, I've only sold like 300 or 400 units. And he was basically seeming like somebody who was at that point in time speaking to Wandi, who he clearly had a relationship with at the time, feeling like somebody who was venting that things were a challenge.
Yeah.
And I was introduced to him, and then Wandi said, if there's no one else you work with, please make sure you work with him. Park that.
Wow.
Now, watch how the universe conspires again, because I'm a big believer in energy, right?
Yeah.
Khaugelo's cousin, a guy by the name of Morris, at the same time, unbeknownst to me, is in Khuli's ear, but is also in Khaugelo's ear, saying, there's this guy. So to Khuli is like, you've got to work with Khaugelo and his partner. They're putting something very interesting together over here. And then on the other side, you've got him putting pressure on Khaugelo, saying, you've got to meet this kid.
Yeah.
And then Khaugelo says, hey man, Morris keeps going on about this guy Khuli. And this is like 3-4 days later, and I'm like, that's the same Khuli Wandi spoke about. And I was like, okay. There's an alignment here. Let's meet this young man. And obviously, I've been listening a lot to the music. I've obviously been immersed in rap culture, and everything that's been happening in rap culture because I'm hip hop first.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, this is exciting. You've got to understand, like, Kabelov is like a bit like Khuli. They're not the people you expected to be the guys that went on to be the
100%.
the big guys from
100%.
or in terms of the solo trajectories. So for me, when I thought Morafe, I thought Tony Mac, right?
Yes.
That's who I thought, like a natural first thought. So like this was a left field guy. But he came to the office, and Khuli and I really hit it off from the word go. And I poured a lot of energy, time. It was one of those where it became a real passion project. I spent countless hours on the road. I mean, we've got stories for days. I mean, performing to 6 people kind of stories, right? Like at a festival where, where the opening act, right? And mind you, you've got to understand, when I travel with TKZee, I'm used to being where there's 10,000 people there. But we spent a lot of that kind of time together, genuinely building this engine together. And it's been an incredible journey,
But it doesn't make sense. Are you like putting Khuli onto some of the TKZee shows?
Of course. Building it like that. Also utilizing Analog Nights as a platform to also showcase the emerging hip-hop movement. So everything is synergistic. Everything's quite synergistic, because what we really were doing were building communities at that point in time, and leveraging everything we had at our disposal to be able to do that. Yeah.
And when does is there a moment, or is it a sort of step by step, brick by brick with Khuli, or is there a moment where you're like, okay, no, something's happening now, this is like, or does something happen that sort of transpires into?
Well, we fortunately he wasn't our first Puravors.
Of course, yeah.
So when he came on, I'd listened to the music and I kind of was like, okay, I can hear which songs are actually going to break in.
Okay.
And I remember, and Khuli will probably attest to this, my thing that I said to him is, I'm going to make you the largest male artist in the country within 3 years. That was in 2010 when I said that to him.
Amazing.
2012, he was Tswada Khuli. Right?
I remember coming across the music, man. I remember just like, I was also shocked. I couldn't believe that it was like Khuli that was part of the clique.
Yeah.
On his solo career, felt like a different artist. Like, I felt like, I remember hearing, I would literally bump, talk, stick him, talk, out the box to refresh.
Exactly.
I remember one night in a club with AKA, and I was like chatting to him about Khuli, and we're both sitting there, and Keenan was like, bro, that's the best artist in the country by far. Like
100%.
It was crazy, man.
100%.
And it's like, and one thing I think the whole industry will attest to, you guys move differently. It didn't feel like there was like, not that you guys weren't part of the industry, you're very much part of it, but you guys just moved in a different way. Like, you wouldn't see Khuli in the same way you'd see the guys at the clubs, and and there were times we would see him hanging around with the gents, and and would to keep to his own. But when it was a public setting, it's like you guys definitely moved differently. Was that like intentional, or was that
100%? When we onboarded talent, we used to go through brand architecture.
Wow.
We used to go through making sure that we set them up for PR and knowing how to behave when there's cameras in front of them. We thought through the entire ambit. We, at any one point in time, you could wake any one of those artists up. They had a brand Bible. They knew what their tonality was. They knew all of that. So that's kind of how we built. And it was a co-creation. And we would set quarterly milestones.
Crazy.
For each of these artists, so that we would know and we would have a measurement of success which is shared between ourselves and our artists.
Incredible.
So that's how we operated. And that's why it is a Khuli, for example, you would say would move differently. And sorry, just one thing. When I knew it is when we did the Fresher video that, okay,
really?
We've got something that is going to just separate us and give us a lane. And that's when we knew it.
Absolutely. I would agree. That's the moment. Yeah. I was just, man, it was iconic, really. And you knew in the moment, like, when it's like someone has a hot single and then the follow-up and then the follow-up and then the video, and then it's just like everything was so well thought out and everything was hitting. I was just like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Khuli Chana is the hottest artist in the country, undoubtedly, in that pocket.
Yeah.
And what comes after the sort of, is there a lot happening while the Khuli Chana thing's happening? Is there?
Yeah, there's a number of people we onboard. Gigi Lemaine is another person that we brought on into the scene. We were working with artists both in music and also outside of music.
Yes.
At a time we had like Tembisi, had Terry Pedo.
Crazy.
We had like a world championship dancer by the name of Deboko Kobokwe.
Crazy.
and a number of others who are onboarded on our books. Nonikasa, Kensalinkosi, a number. Like we had a full on.
And it was outside of not just music or sports.
Yeah, it was entertainment broadly.
Incredible.
So that's what's happening at that time, and we're building that engine there. Obviously, Maftown Heights is beginning to be born as well around 2010, and that's born from a realization that I think Khuli and I share this vision very much, as does Khaukhelo, is that you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go with people. Absolutely. So we recognize that it's all good and well for Jabba or Dukes to be the only people or Khuli to be the only person at any one point in time. But how do we develop an ecosystem that will see us showcase the genre that we love?
Yes.
In a way where we are all then going to become center of culture.
Yeah.
And that for us was the play around something like a Maftown Heights. And that starts to be born around 2010. There's a lot going on. Analog Nights is going on with Wendy and I. There's a lot going on. It's a very fast period.
And how big is the team that time?
Always have believed in lean and mean teams.
Okay.
I learned that very early in the Dream Team days, because I remember in that first year we grew quickly and very quickly realized how quickly that burns cash.
Got you.
I mean, one day it was Khaukhela and I in the office, and then before I knew it, we had like 15 people on payroll. And we had to very quickly pull it back and go, okay, but what are 15 people doing on the team? So we, as a consequence of that, have always you've got to be very careful in terms of how you bring on costs.
And you guys are self-funded, no investments coming in. So basically,
we started the business on 80,000 rands.
Crazy, man.
The two of us put together, 80 grand.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Okay. And so is your natural progression from this world of management company, is this then sort of natural progression to then stepping into running
labels?
Is that sort of what comes next?
Yeah, that is the next step. So I start to kind of go, okay, this is all interesting, but how do I scale from 5 or 6 hot artists to a catalog?
Yes.
Right? And I start to, have conversations with people who I think are doing it really well.
Yes.
Sean Watson, who was at the time the second in command to Keith Lister at Sony, becomes a mentor of mine. Okay. And Sean Watson, in and of himself, has done some incredible things. If you consider the ran CCP, that's Brenda, that's
crazy.
Arthur, that's
crazy.
90s, some of your Mendoza, that's where Sean cuts his teeth, right? As CCP. So had a lot of respect for what he had done in urban music, and also just a genuinely good human being.
Yes.
So started to spend time, coffees, just asking questions. And I think he probably liked my mind. And he was like, okay. He started having a conversation with me about, so why don't you come and learn how to run a label at Sony? And I remember it was around 2015 where I was like, okay, I do want to grow into something else. It was beginning to feel like I was plateauing, and I wanted to learn and kind of understand how I can scale this business more. So at that time, I remember then resigning and kind of selling my share back to Khaukhelo around Dream Team. And just knowing, again, remember that thing about knowing when you know that this particular part of the chapter has ended.
Yes.
And I've been very good at honoring that with myself. And it was around that time where then the South African Music Awards, the year before that, I was made the first independent label vice chairperson of the recording industry of South Africa.
Okay, amazing.
As well as the first chairperson of the supervisory committee of the South African Music Awards. The youngest, I think I was at the time.
Is this through relationships?
It's relationships. I just had built relationships with Sipho Sitole, Sean Watson, I think David Du Plessis ran Risa at the time, and a couple other people who kind of,
we have to take our hats off to these people, because it's like that's who better, you know?
Yeah, 100%. You
and
know,
forward thinking, and you know, when you look at it,
exactly.
you just go
People
like,
who
it's
decide to give people a chance.
absolutely.
Right? And it was through that where then I remember at the time there wasn't a CEO for the summers.
Yes.
And they were like, listen, could you possibly assist in just overseeing the operations around the summers and getting them over the finish line? That was for 2015.
Got you.
And then the next year, I think I spent another year there where I played in the CEO role.
Got
So
you.
the 2015 and 2016 summers, then I oversaw. And all through that time, I guess I still wasn't sure about being involved in a major label and the time sacrifice that would come with.
Yes.
And then around 2016, I made the decision. And that's when I joined Sony as their head of urban music. And then I spent the next 5 years there.
Incredible.
And Sean, again, that's Sean who engineered that particular moment. And at the time, it seems so weird when these young kids will hear this. That label was, call it 85% physical. And at least local urban music was 85% physical. And call it 15 to 20% digital, at least with the roster composition at the time.
Crazy.
And I remember one of my KPIs from Sean was, I need you to future-proof it by building a roster of artists that are going to be digital first. And that's where the journey starts with hip-hop and Sony. So Ricky gets signed around that time. Keenan gets re-signed. That's the Kwesta years. That's... Yeah, she's that entire hip-hop roster, most of it at least.
And what's that transition like? I mean, from running the management company, I mean, it was more than a management company. Ultimately, you guys were also a label to Khuli, but
label,
you were
brand,
doing
personal
deals with
management,
the,
exactly,
you were doing deals with the record labels, right? So you weren't sort of, were you going through one label that time or with different artists? Yeah, 100%. So what's that transition like to now seeing the back end of everything else that you have been sort of handing over to now being a part of that ecosystem?
It's quite the transition. I think especially as an independent, as a person who's cut their teeth in the independent space.
Yes.
And I think it's a learning that if one is thinking about making that transition, they've got to understand that, you know, there's many pillars one needs to navigate. There's the people and politics pillar. There is the technologies and understanding kind of the amount of tech that actually goes into making an engine like that operate. It is the processes. It's and especially as a person who's independent, it can sometimes feel lethargic, but because of the systematic nature of it, and necessarily so, given how big the beast is.
Gotcha.
So it was an interesting learning, but a great one, insofar as that you really come to understand the interplay, right?
Yeah.
And the importance of scale and the importance of, you know, I'd spend a lot of my time on making sure that we have 5 large artists, but you don't understand the importance of tonnage and the long tail and all of these elements that actually build, and catalog, which actually really build your passive income if you're in the space. So it was learning all of that stuff and really understanding how you pull these levers, and also coming to appreciate how much money you leave on the table, right? In terms of where the pockets of income actually are, that you might not even necessarily be exposed to as an indie, just based on capacity and other things.
Yes. And so you were there for...
Till 2019, late 2019.
Late 2019.
Yeah.
And do you then transition, when do you go to...
UMG?
Universal.
So
that
21 actually.
21.
I spent a year where I was doing quite a bit of my own thing again, and then I got courted back in. I always get courted back into these spaces.
Yeah.
So in 2020, I was doing a lot of work. That's actually when Refiloe was born, which is the entity that I have now.
Yes.
And we were doing a lot of like TV work, shooting TV ads, syncing music, bespoke music.
Gotcha.
And a number of other elements specifically around music and campaign management. And Sipho Dlamini, actually at the beginning of 2020, came to me and was like, I'm looking for somebody who can head up urban at Universal. And I was like, I don't know. And then, COVID happened. My mother passed away,
Yes.
which was quite heavy for me in 2020. But by the end of September of that year, I think I just needed to slow down a bit, ironically. And that's
Yes.
kind of why you then go into corporate. Because, when you're on your own.
100%. There's no 9 to 5.
No.
You're always on. There's no...
100%. And that's how I get to Universal. And that's then the Universal years.
I love that you said that because I see it the same way. I'm like, guys, a job is part-time, man. We have lots of free time with the job, 100%.
Guys, I love how guys will talk about being busy. You don't know busy until
100%.
you actually need to make sure that people who are employed by you are paid.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now, how many years at Universal were you there?
I left there last year.
Okay. So now all these years of major label knowledge, what is your take on it, having been in both sort of places? And just this question is more towards, the next generation of artists. Do you think that model is still imperative to certain artists? Do you think the shift is sort of upon us
Yeah, I definitely think the shift is upon us. I mean, if you look at Luminate and all of these reports and you consider the actual sheer deterioration over time of like your major labels versus your indie players, yes, they will get consumed. The cycle is, it grows, they get acquired, and so it shifts around.
Yes.
But really, in terms of pure A&R work, I would argue that I just don't know if it is, let's just say it is not the only mode to market anymore.
Yes,
I think in certain places, and when people come to me a lot of the times, it's always quite genre specific, right? Like there's certain genres where your mode to market is quite traditional and it is quite capital intensive. And you know what? If you can use somebody else's money to do it, great. Just make sure you manage the commercials very carefully.
Yes.
But there's also spaces and pockets now. And I think specifically where I would argue hip hop and in particular Amapiano is concerned. Amapiano, that was the most interesting case study. I was in the label framework towards the back end of 2020 because I started, call it August of 2021 at Universal.
Yeah.
And it was these kids, I specifically remember that Jazzy Disciple era and the explosion of short form content and how it was being used as a key marketing driver by kids that had not even 2 nickels to rub together, but were able to get attention globally, right? And it was like, okay, this is interesting. So you've got a mode to market with these short form content platforms where if you're smart, and especially with the Amapiano guys in particular, they continue to index better than any label campaigns I'm seeing at this particular point in time on those platforms.
Wow.
So if you can continue to be smart in terms of how you get attention on these short form content, that has been democratized. Your mode for attention has been democratized. Similarly, you've got a number of players that, before it was DIY or label, that have now kind of filled this middle tier where, you can get some label services, but you can still retain rights. You can still have a lion's share of your percentages. Yeah. And with the right team around you and with the right know-how, I think you can build out quite a sizable business without. But again, it's very specific. Like if I'm speaking to somebody who is an Afro soul or Afro pop here, maybe you might want to consider a different route because radio still might be more important for you. Yes. And. But again, the opportunities now and the way our ecosystem is developed out, there are a number of service providers who can help you build out a business. Yes. Just provided that you are willing to invest in it somewhat. And that you're also smart around it. Because again, like I say to you, this new world of short form content and just kind of digital marketing. Because if you think about how, having sat in that label environment, how it's changed from 5-6 years ago, the marketing mix used to be a marketing mix that involved quite a lot of traditional media. But now, if you're spending more than 10% of your marketing spend outside of online, you're spending a lot. Wow. So if that's the case, then yeah, every opportunity exists if you've got the right product and you've got the right smart approaches to social media and digital media.
I love that. That's a really powerful answer. Thank you. That's some gems to put in there. That's like, and so high level, you think right now in the independent world, a good strategy in music would be focus on short form, focus on building it yourself. Rather look at more of a distribution setup where it's, maybe 70-30 or 80-20, somewhere along those lines where you retain as much of the rights on as short of a license as possible.
I would lean in that direction if I was to kind of, I'm not really playing in the label space as much as right now, but there's people who come and consult with me quite a bit. And if I was to take on an artist now, and if I was to take it on, realistically, I would go as far as I can. Where those challenges and limitations might become a place where you need a label partner is when you are really beginning to get momentum in markets where it becomes quite expensive to go at it by yourself. Sampling in the US is not you've got so many tiers of radio. It costs you so much to get through those tiers of radio. PR, media, it's a very thirsty and expensive engine. When you're getting to that level of momentum, absolutely, then it's a good time for you to consider. But again, you come there with leverage, right? You're not coming there as somebody where they're going to tell you it's a 12% to 15% sliding scale escalation, take it or leave it. They're picking you up on momentum. And when they're picking you up on momentum, you can then dictate the kind of deals that you're getting into. And yes, ownership does matter because ownership is bequeathable at the end of the day.
I love that. Yeah. That's really, really powerful, man. Thank you. That's great advice. All right. So with this sort of leaving the labels, do you go back to Dream Team? Is that sort of still on its own doing its thing? You're not involved at all?
No. As I say, that chapter's behind me.
Incredible.
But what I'm realizing is that the universe keeps saying, okay, clearly, Kabelo, I used such a powerful term the other day when I was with him, where he talked about stewardship of talents.
Yes.
And he said to not leverage a talent that has been God-given is bad stewardship.
Wow.
And for me, it's just really around kind of understanding if I'm going to play in management, what do I want to do in management?
Yes.
And I think I keep a very small roster. There's things that I'll do for very specific people at this point in time. Obviously, TKZee, there's Kabelo, who I work with. And there's a couple who I'm about to onboard because I'm beginning to play. And again, similarly to Dream Team, where it will be in music, but also outside of music, just across the entertainment gambit.
And so is that all under
Refram? Yeah. So I'm probably going to hive out an entity called Managed by Double R, which is where I'm going to house a lot of these assets.
Amazing.
And then I'm very much playing, as I say, in the content space. I'm doing a lot of media work. I'm doing a lot of work, as I say, with brands, as well as kind of owned work. We've recently put out a very interesting documentary, a 4-part documentary around this Maftown Heights movement that Khuli and I started, which is currently on DSTV Catch-Up.
Yes.
We are already in production or pre-prod for other documentaries that we're looking to do.
Incredible.
So we're going to be playing quite heavily in that space.
Yeah.
And also festivals, man. Like, Maftown Heights, I'm quite excited. We are going to be, for the first time ever, we're doing two in a cycle.
Yes,
we're going to be doing Johannesburg.
Incredible.
And then we're going to be doing another one in Mahikeng at a date to be announced.
Just on the documentary, man, I watched it. It's phenomenal. And I think it's so important to, again, document. These things live forever. That documentary is also going to mean even so much more in 30 years from now 100%. And 50 years from now, and it was so refreshing to, like being in the scene and being part of it is one thing, but to get a little sort of in depth. And I was like, wow, there's so many things. I was like, I didn't know that happened. I didn't know this happened. I mean, I knew Khuli was like into the whole gymnastics thing. I didn't know that's the place where it happened. And it just gave me so much more in depth that I was just like, wow, this is powerful, man.
Yeah. And I think episode 1 of that documentary was particularly important to Khuli and I because nothing happens outside of an environment, right?
Yes.
And that's the Mabana story and the Mafikeng and the Mabatu story, which is what Mabatu was, which was what Mafikeng was before it became Mafikeng or Mahikeng. was such an important story to tell. And we only told like but a small part of that story there.
Yes.
Because you've got to understand that that's the place where Bob TV is born.
Yes.
Where, the Bob recording studios
Yes.
are, where that incredible investment is made, where, for those who are watching who don't know what Mabatu was or Buputatswana was, that essentially was one of the homelands that was developed. But I loved, again, just that the spirit of the late gentleman Rem Lucas Mangope, in his approach to it all was that, okay, fine, this is the lemons we've been dealt, but how do I make lemonade, right?
Yes.
And the investments in culture were really incredible. People like Bob Mabena come out of there, Notemba Madumo, Melanie Bala, Melanie's son at the time,
Yes.
Titch Mataz. For those who are watching who are younger, must Google some of these names. These are some of the most important names in radio broadcast history come out of there. And this guy who essentially was condemned, or these people were condemned to a homeland, the then leader goes and invests in the BBC coming into that little homeland and intensively training up the staff complement of Bob TV so that they can be able to run an operation like that. They invest. The Bob recording studios were at their height. They had equipment which could only be found there on the continent.
Yeah.
People like Michael Jackson have recorded at that studio. Yeah. I think Jay-Z's recorded there.
It's the world's biggest SSL disc at the time.
Yes, that's right.
There.
Exactly.
It's such a special place to me. It was one of my first gigs I played. Miller used to have, I think, a spin-off party of the 60s that time.
Yes.
I was 16 years old. I got booked at that show. Glenn Lewis would throw those parties.
Yes, and Glenn is also from Pop TV, Pop Radio as well. Yeah.
And so Maftown's always just been a super special place for me, man. It was one of my first breakout gigs there back in the day,
And that's why we had to tell that story. And we just told them the Mabana Motswako story.
Yes,
we touched on the gymnastics.
Yes.
But all of these people in this environment that invested so heavily in sports and arts is where these people come from. And that's where you see this hotbed of talent that is then developed. And, for me, the big lesson, especially with, call it this new dispensation. And I'm loving the energy of the new sports minister. I hope it translates into action. But I would love to see him meaningfully create hotbeds and environments where people can be allowed to thrive. Where we can, what did he say? Keep kids out of the streets through sports.
Yes.
I would also say through culture broadly, and I'm hoping that he can do that. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, fingers crossed as well, Two more questions for you, Refiloe. What comes next? What sort of, maybe with Maftown Heights, are you seeing that sort of become a big global player in the festival scene? What do you see happening with the management side? What is in store for the next sort of chapter of where you're envisioning? I know the journey always changes, but we always have something that we're working towards. What is that something you're working towards? Definitely
looking to grow out and build more cultural communities through festivals. Maftown Heights will be but one, but there's a couple in the works. Maftown Heights, in and of itself, we want to make it the largest hip-hop festival on the continent.
Epic.
And I have no doubt that we will. The management side, as I said, I'll keep it bespoke, but I'll keep it with really, really choice people that I want to work with. There's going to be forays into culture tech, which are coming, which are in the process of being developed now. Too early to talk around, but there's a lot coming around that space and a pivot towards tech as well.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And anything else you want to mention before the last question from your side?
No, I think more than anything else, it's been an interesting thing to also be inspired by people like yourself. Like I remember George the beatboxer.
Yeah.
Right? Like George Avakian, the human beatboxer. And to watch, and I think especially as in this new chapter around the festivals, watching the experiences you curated and how you curated them has been very interesting for me. And I look forward to spending a lot of time chatting more around how we create these kind of things.
I appreciate that, bro. Yeah, anytime, man. Anytime you want to pick my brain on that stuff. For you, anytime. As a new sort of closing tradition, I would just like to know on the podcast, I'd like to know from your side, from your perspective, what is the meaning of life?
Wow. Sure. Yeah. The meaning of life really is, for me, fundamentally, it's all about presence. Fundamentally, everything is transitory. And the moment you spend too much of your time wondering or regretting the things that you've done before, or worrying about the things that are to come, you completely miss the point of living. And living is done in the moment. And for me, the meaning of life is about being present and making sure that you milk every single experience out of the presence. That for me is fundamentally it. And I think that was really shaped around loss, the loss of a parent and the loss of people who, you think you have time around. You don't. So for me, it's really about presence and making sure you enjoy the moment.
It's a beautiful answer. Thank you so much for making time, bro. I just want to also honor you. You have been, I always say yourself, Khuli, everyone you've ever worked with, man, you've always been a very honorable guy. You've always been true to your word, always. And you've really brought up the professional and business etiquette and manner of the industry as a whole, not just your clique. I think a lot of us have watched how you guys have moved and taken notes and learned from the decisions you guys have made, from the smallest of details to like some of the bigger decisions you make. So shout out to you, bro. Please, you need all the flowers, bro, because you've been such an important player in this industry, not just hip hop, I think across the spectrum. So shout out to you, my brother, and thank you for making time.
Thank you.
And
for
I look forward
me.
to doing it again, bro. When they're premiering your new documentary on the red carpet, bro. We'll chop up another one in LA, probably somewhere. And,
Love it.
After you get your awards and so on and so forth.
Thank you, brother.
My brother, thank you so much. Bless my blood. Bless you, bro. Thank you, man. That was beautiful, bro. So many gems, man. I think it's going to resonate with so many people. And it's going to age so well.
Thank you.
A podcast like this, bro. Thank you, my brother.
And keep doing this, man. Your conversations are interesting.
No, thank you,
Are
brother.
really, really interesting. And I love the fact that you're focusing on people who we never get to hear from.